Theater in Shakespeare's day was sophisticated, plentiful, and hugely popular. Everyone from Queen Elizabeth, and after her King James I, to the aristocracy, to the lowliest commoner, attended and appreciated the plays. Theater for Londoners of the Renaissance was the equivalent of our plays, movies, television, and YouTube all rolled into one. Playhouses that most people attended were the public theaters. There were several, and competition for audiences was stiff. The more famous public theaters were the straightforwardly named The Theatre, as well as the Curtain, the Rose, the Swan, the Fortune, and for our purposes the most important, the Globe. The Globe was Shakespeare's theatre, and like many other public theatres, it was located on the south bank of the River Thames. Although there were slight differences in the construction of Elizabethan public playhouses, they shared a great many similarities. To begin with, they were built with a circular footprint, like a giant letter O. In fact, Shakespeare often refers in his plays to this wooden O. Next, they were almost entirely open air, clearly open to the elements. There was no way to darken the theaters and no way to protect from the weather. Plays were produced during the daytime, between the months of May and October, rain or shine. Companies flew a flag above the theater to indicate that there was a performance on that day. The audience sat around the outside edge of the ring in 3 levels. The higher up one sat, the more expensive the seat. Partly this is because the closer one was to the roof, the better the cover on rainy days. But the far more compelling reason to sit higher up was that the elevation gave you a little distance from the 500 or so folks who, for the price of a single penny, could stand in the yard, or the area in front of the stage, and watch the play. They were less than affectionately known as the penny stinkers. Audience members talked freely to each other and to the actors. Legend has it they sometimes threw things at characters they didn't like. The stage itself was raised and partially covered by a kind of canopy known as the heavens. The canopy was supported by wooden pillars painted to look like marble, topped with actual gold leaf. The underside of the heavens was also brightly painted with the sun, the moon, and the signs of the zodiac. Gold leaf decorated the edges of the ceiling coffers. Traps were cut into the floor of the stage to allow for sudden appearances or disappearances, for example, ghosts or fairies. The stage extended into the pit so that the audience could surround it on 3 sides. The back wall of the theater was also brightly painted. The 2 smaller doors on the left and right allowed for entrances and exits, while the center doors could open wide to reveal a surprise. Above the doors was a balcony, perfect for the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. Musicians were also positioned here to provide music throughout a play. It became popular among young noblemen to sit here, so they could not only see the play, but be seen themselves. Scenery was limited to small pieces. For example, a banner might tell us that we're in France instead of England. An ornate chair turns the stage into a throne room. A strategically placed tree indicates a forest. The structure at the back of the stage is called the tiring house. It was used to store set pieces and costumes, and for the actors to dress or attire themselves. A quick note about costumes. It wasn't a custom at this time for actors to dress in anything other than contemporary English clothing. Romeo and Juliet, for example, would dress like 16th century English upper-class teenagers. Julius Caesar, Brutus, and Cassius wouldn't have worn togas, they'd have worn standard doublet and hose. Cleopatra wore an Elizabethan dress. Which brings us to the important topic of women in Elizabethan theater. There weren't any. Women were not permitted to take part in the theater, not as playwrights, shareholders, or actresses. It wasn't considered seemly. The roles of women and girls were all played by adolescent boys, boys whose voices had not yet changed, or young men who could do a convincing job of sounding like women. Yes, this includes Juliet. Theater companies were comprised of the same group of actors year in and year out. The lead tragic actor usually played the lead roles. The clown played the best comic roles. A small group of shareholders, of which Shakespeare was one for the Globe, managed the company, took financial responsibility, and earned the biggest portion of the profits. All companies were required by law to be licensed by a member of the aristocracy. The patron of Shakespeare's company was initially the Lord Chamberlain, and so the company was called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. When King James succeeded to the throne, he took over the company's patronage, and so it became known as the King's Men. Richard Burbage was one of the most famous actors of the time. Many scholars believe he was the first Romeo. We know that he went on to play Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear.